再提醒各位贵宾请将手机关机或调成震动，谢谢您的配合。此外，本次的口译机若要收听中文频道，请切成 C 频道；英文频道请转换成E 频道。欢迎各位来宾参加由国家人权博物馆筹备处主办，并由东吴大学承办之国外人权博物馆学者交流座谈会。首先，让我来介绍今天洽邻现场的贵宾。首先，让我们欢迎国家人权博物馆筹备处主任王义群主任。以及东吴大学人文社会学院教授黄默教授。接下来要介绍的是接受本处邀请来台参加此次座谈会的3位外国博物馆馆长：加拿大人权博物馆执行长 Dr. Murray， 德国柏林霍恩舍恩豪森纪念馆馆长 Dr. Knapp， 以及智利记忆与人权博物馆馆长 Director Brodsky。此外，也要特别谢谢墨西哥城市大学 Professor Diaz 来帮忙我们进行西语转英语的翻译。本次座谈会还特别邀请到台湾政治受难者关怀协会理事长蔡宽裕前辈、50年代白色恐怖案件平反促进会总干事张英珏女士、前会长吴声论会长、苏有朋会长。最后，我们有请今天的主持人东吴大学人文社会学院黄默教授为我们致开场词。
各位前辈、各位贵宾，大家早！我们非常荣幸邀到3位国外的人权博物馆的馆长来跟我们的前辈、来跟我们的贵宾对谈。他们3位馆长都非常有经验尤其是德国跟2位人权博物馆的馆长。这位德国的馆长到过我们这里，所以他对我们这里情况非常的了解。他早上到这里，他最关心的是这2、3年来，他应该是2年前到过这里，发生了什么改变？有没有什么这个新的有没有什么这个对这个记忆的保留，对这个回忆的书写有没有进一步的这个展开工作那他非常关心，他也非常了解。那智利人权博物馆的馆长是第一次到我们这里来 昨天在我们学校里的这个国际研讨会也做了一次的报告对他主持的这个博物馆的一些新的想法、新的做法，也对我们都非常有帮助那这个Diaz 教授是今年在我们东吴大学访问教授，他是从墨西哥来那我们对于墨西哥实在了解非常少所以我们非常荣幸能邀他到我们大学里访问我们对墨西哥、对智利在了解非常的少。加拿大的博物馆馆长加拿大的博物馆是一个崭新的博物馆，跟另外两个这一个人权博物馆、人权纪念馆比较不一样那待会在他的报告当中我们也可以看得出来他们关心所在那在一个程度我想也可以这样说，就加拿大是比较幸运的，没有经过这样的，比如说在智利在这个德国、在台湾这样惨痛的经验，所以他们的博物馆的想象，他们博物馆的经营又比较不一样。那待会他们都会做这个详细的介绍那我希望我们今天可以大家有比较多的交流。他们3位都跟我讲，他们非常希望能多听各位前辈的看法、前辈的意见，怎么样能把记忆保留下来？怎么样把这一段很悲伤的、很悲痛的经验保留下来？所以我们的下一代的子孙才能有些了解我们才不再犯这样的错误我就说到这里谢谢大家。
感谢黄墨老师，我们今天的主持人，还要感谢来自德国、加拿大跟智利的3位馆长。但是我要特别更大的敬意跟致谢是，今天来参与我们这个国际交流很重要的各位长辈。那因为时间的因素，就容许我不一一为大家介绍每一位对我还有对筹备处未来的人权博物馆付出非常努力的各位长辈们。那除了我们各位长辈之外，还有几位长期在关心人权博物馆长期发展的，包括我们的艾琳达女士，包括我们的曹新荣先生，包括我们的林慧文老师，还有包括很多我们 NGO 人权方面团体的伙伴跟朋友，也非常感谢你们今天的到来。人权博物馆筹备处至今成立将迈入第2年，从挂牌成立迄今，以一个2岁的机关，我们努力的几个方向跟几件事。第一件事情是，所有长辈针对这一段苦痛记忆的历史真相的呈现，是我们列为第一重点的要务。因此，在过去的1年半，即将迈入2年的此刻，我们在大家的协助下，不断的把记忆做一个完整的呈现跟记录。不管从我们的口述历史，不管从所有的纪录片，我们都一直在努力，这是我们第一个部分。第2个部分，我们在积极的推动国内人权教育的推广。我们结合所有国中小大专所有的老师的努力，希望把这段历史纳入大学教育的课程。我们今年年初努力了很久，在今年年中逐渐开始发展 我们东部跟东华大学历史系纳入了白色恐怖在下学期重点的2学分到4学分的课纲。那台北、台中、台南，我们都在努力中。我们第3个非常重要的重点是，除了让我们国内历史真相的还原、跟长辈记忆、跟教育的推广，迈向国际，跟所有的国际的国家、城市做接轨。我们知道，在第3波民主转型化国家，20世纪是一个苦痛的世纪。在这个苦痛世纪的一个发展中，很多跟我们一样，比我们更悲惨，或许轻于我们，或许重于我们，所有的人类，所有的公民都曾经受过集权独裁之苦。因此呢，今年在整个东吴大学的协助之下，我们迈向了关键的第1步。在今年10月，我们特别由郭正纯前辈，我们长期的志工，我们园区的受难者，代表园区到日本跟基百合签订2馆姐妹协议的合作备忘。今年年初，在50年代还有我们的互助会的协助之下，我们跟韩国的徐胜教授有了密切的518基金会的合作。今年年底，这个国际的研讨会是个重要的开始。开始什么？我们在前天，欧洲理事会的欧特理事应邀来参加我们东吴国际人权教育研讨会，来到园区参访。他非常佩服在座各位长辈的勇气，在一个地方受过苦难，却能够再站出来，将这个苦难的苦痛的记忆传递给下一代，这个深深的震动。我们还有来自于我们加拿大建筑及人权 NGO 团体的我们的理事长，也在前天来到园区，震动于我们园区所呈现历史冲突的整个还原。今天我们邀请来的这3位国际的人权各领域的博物馆，分别代表3个向度，一个是丰厚于德国整个历史真相的还原，我们的波恩舍恩纪念馆；另外一个是智利人权与记忆纪念馆的整个呈现，如何在整个还原历史的同时，在当代的历史做一个展现。加拿大是一个全新的人权的领域的一个建筑物，用一个象征，用一个世界人权公约的模式，然后来做一个人权的推广。我想待会儿的这个部分异常的精彩，而且非常的会让大家收获很多。那但是今天只是一个开始，我们接下来在东吴的帮忙之下，我们在2526，所有100多位来自42个国家的不同领域的人权研究专家，会兵分2路。第一路70多位的人权学者会到绿岛，40几位的人权学者会再来到景美。我们乐见将各位长辈的历史的记忆的台湾苦痛的真相的这个部分，借由这些我们的专家学者，像撒播种子到全球各个国家、各个城市，希望有一天大家能够在不同的国家、不同的城市，认识到台湾这段历史。非常感谢大家今天的与会，那希望大家有个快乐而且丰富收获的早晨，谢谢。我想由我来开始今天15分钟的一个人权博物馆的一个报告。1947，台湾在整个228之后到1987的解严，我想所有的长辈诉说的这一段台湾非常重要人权伤害的历史。过去的那段历史所造成的一个伤害，很多当时是青年跟很多家人都经历了很残酷的身心的锤炼。我们筹备处为了所有的长辈，然后努力在拼起非常重要的一个共同记忆的一个呈现。我们要传递给我们孩子的是一个重要的价值，这个价值是我们必须汲取教训，然后不能再重蹈覆辙。各位现在所在的地方是我们的景美人权文化园区，这部分3.64公顷的土地承载了很多历史的伤痕跟记忆。其中，我们的仁爱楼看守所、我们的第一法庭、我们的军事法庭，都是留存着当时记忆的点点滴滴。 另外一个非常重要的场域，我们的绿岛人权文化园区，整个园区的场域32公顷，32公顷是一个当时在极权威权下，类似像集中营的这样的一个呈现，里面包含了50年代受难长辈的新生训导处的记忆，包含了70年代之后我们所有就是比较邻近长辈、年轻长辈的所有的绿洲山庄，还有宪兵连，我们利用复原的方式来做这样的一个还原。那包括了我们的燕子洞、牛头山，这些都是长辈记忆的一部分。我们努力了哪些事情？我们认为历史的伤痕不应该被磨灭，因此我们透过不断的口述历史，以截至今年来说，我们2年多以来，我们努力的所有280位前辈口述历史的完成。280位占了多少的比例呢？如果以我们目前已经获得补偿的在前辈跟家属8546的比例而言，200多位不到10%，我们还必须要不断的努力。然后纪录片是我们一个很重要的开始。我们也跟党管局合作，左边的这个照片，我们是将长辈尘封60多年的遗书，在我们政治关怀受难者协会蔡宽裕理事长的协助下，我们送还给他的家属陈良先生的遗书。单元2呢，我们为了让所有的历史的这件事情能够不断的做一个书面的展现，所有的口述历史在前辈同意的前提下、授权的前提下，我们用出版刊物来诉说。我们希望明年开始，我们能够把这些刊物翻译成英文，能够让国际的朋友能够清楚的知道。我们的口述历史的部分，在整个就是纪录片，我们现在放一段，今年刚完成，明年会正式我们作为教育推广的一部分的纪录片影片，给大家做一个观赏。
有一天，我下班转来，看到这个大汉的，到迄个5岁安尼摸下着，摸下着安尼困，我安尼袂晓讲的迄个痛苦。囡仔紧咧透落来泡牛奶，紧咧互食迄个细汉仔，我爱卡饼迄个，紧咧泡牛奶互食。看到2个安尼闪我来，安尼无仔囝，大家闪我安尼哭。你讲无好啊，爸爸念伊会转来哦。你无好，大家安尼靠乖者，听妈妈爱去趁钱来互恁食哦。你无好诶，乖乖，安尼8岁较会晓，安尼拢敢若讲。小弟小妹拢若读册转来拢会晓照顾。
20年中间就靠着每礼拜2届甲厝内通批，有时无代志，无啥物通写，伊就买一张明信片，简单画一个翁仔报平安。
我就太远咯，几个月。阮囡仔破皮甲死，阮老爸破皮甲死，阮看我破皮甲死，拢袂今仔这病今仔死嘛。这早个死，我转来才惊着，我倒来对拢毋知影。看，伊在配哦，伊甲看做换条啦。
将幸福坐牢期间，伊的牵手无用照顾囡仔甲教册，会使讲无法度去甲探家。也毋过每一届离家，伊拢会克服困难，去看家己的翁婿到底放关节倒位。
判无去了，我就鼓励讲，朝对象哦，安怎安尼，你毋好当啊。 我来讲，这车都袂行，但永远当无车。
有啦，定定叫我讲改嫁，我讲无啦，我囡仔较要紧。
我们在做记忆的工作，这一份记忆的工作，我们明年6月，我们希望能够完成20位，每一位受难者25分钟，所有记忆短片的一部分。我跟我的团队，还有所有的政治受难者的长辈，我们有个目标，我们希望能够把所有长辈跟家属所有点点滴滴的记忆，都能够把它留存在未来我们成立的博物馆。除了我们记忆虚拟的、大家记得的、痛苦的，我们透过什么让它具象化？文物的展现，一张信纸，一张照片，一把小提琴，一个地球仪，一份耶稣传翻译的耶稣传，都是在那个囚禁的人权被剥夺的年代的时间中，唯一能够撑着活下去的所有的信念。我们的文物长辈都保存得非常好，但是我们提供了更好的一个就是专业上面的一个修复，因此我们每年的7月跟8月都是很重要，到台湾各地做文物巡检的鉴检。我们在做什么事情？我们让所有这些记忆化成具象的所有的物件，能够传递真实的留给下一代。小提琴，一个承诺的书包，是由我们50年代高龄受难者许贵标我们的长辈捐给人权博物馆。这个书包是一份承诺，对狱中所有苦难前辈的承诺。一个地球仪，让我们的黄广海前辈能够在踏出监狱之后的人生，有了一个撑下去在过去受苦的年代。他因为这个地球仪出来之后，真的环游了世界。信念是长辈要带给我们面对人生困境时很重要，撑下去我们年轻人往前走的力量。除了这个部分之外，我们非常感谢由我们陈明诚先生长期投入在我们人权还有台湾白色恐怖历史的我们的一位文化工作者。不是每位长辈都有能力能够写出20万到30万的书，但是每一个长辈一定有能力写下500个字到1000个字的文章。因此我们这本书，我们用了一个集结的力量，让所有的长辈，你能写多少日，我们都把它集合起来，能够帮他集结出册。去年12月我们出版了《秋蝉的悲鸣》，现在下个月我们即将出版第2本。我们每一年都要出由受难者写或由家属写他们长辈的故事的合集。场景的复原，模型跟场景的复原，对于所有的学习的年轻学子是一个重要的界面跟平台。它的重要在于，我们除了想象之外，可以非常具体的了解。2011年，我们完成了福利社外一区的展示模型的一个完整的一个呈现。我们的医护室陈宗统医师贡献了他的记忆，让我们能够完整的做一个复原。餐厅在所有各位长辈的努力之下，我们还原了到底在外役受难者的长辈是怎么去吃什么样的一个菜，是怎么样的去在一个餐厅中做一个集合。我们即将在下个月完成的是我们的汤衣工厂。如果当初的集权制度的设计是利用劳力来剥夺你应该每一位优秀的台湾青年对这个国家的贡献，一个是医师， 他的专业在整个医疗的专业知识做一个为社会的奉献，可是他被无情的剥夺在用他的劳力去洗衣服。一个老师，一个画家，用剥夺掉他们专业技能的方式，强迫他们在非常寒冷的冬天去洗着所有这些公部门的一个衣服，这个部分当然是一个无情的制度所造成的无情的剥夺。我们把它还原，让我们的孩子能够知道这些长辈们是怎么去被用苦力来剥夺他们的应该要有的一个专业的技能。一个城市的发展，每一些地方会因为不断的一个呈现，不断的有所改变。50年代的记忆场景已经不见，我们特别由陈孟和先生一笔一画，跟着团队到档案的历史，找出所有的照片或所有可以能够看得到的影片的2秒钟的画面，我们还原了青岛东路3号50年代的模型展。现在那个地方是喜来登。如果我们不告诉我们的孩子，如果我们不告诉我们的国际的友人，谁会知道那个地方曾经是一个苦痛人权的剥夺的场域呢？所以我们用模型，我们明年希望在现场立下一个牌子，让光明的城市曾经有的黑暗的历史，必须明白地告诉所有的一切的人。新生训导处，长辈们50年代在绿岛怎么度过困顿的岁月，我们用模型来说出所有的可能。这也是陈孟和先生努力的奉献。我常常在说，没有他对于整个艺术一笔一画的记录，没有他有这样的一个美术方面的想象，当然有美术方面的能力，还包括了我们的欧阳文前辈、欧阳建华长辈。那在几位用画能够留下记忆的这些长辈的面前，跟他们的呈现，我们让孩子知道1950年代的绿岛是长什么样子，集中营是什么样的。这是我们每年170位的教师大家努力的一个成果。这些教师都是我们非常重要的一个散播人权教育的种子的对象。我们到蔡瑞月，在那个困顿的年代，蔡瑞月如何在绿岛的燕子洞遥望、想象对岸的夫婿雷石瑜先生。我想这个部分，我们到那边感受历史的记忆。这就是刚刚我提到的，北中南4所大学现在已经谈妥2/3，每一所学校会在未来明年列入正式的大学的历史学分，讲述2个重点，一个是白色恐怖的大历史，一个是口述历史如何去进行。历史的记忆，没有在座的长辈，我们没有办法做到。你们是我们筹备处、我们人权馆很重要的伙伴，我们的磐石、我们的基石。从每一位长辈对着孩子说话的这些影像，我们能够知道，孩子专注聆听的眼神中，已经种下了对于人权维护跟尊重的一个记忆。除了我们的园区在场的30几位非常辛苦的志工之外，我们还努力的培育90个青年人权的种子的年轻人。这些年轻人都是未来我们社会的希望，也是我们非常重要的伙伴。绿岛一样，我们已经跟台东大学每年都有20位的青年学子，在暑假旺季的时候到绿岛，透过了一个学分的修习，然后到绿岛做实际的导览。我们试着做这样的努力。我们36位的人权志工的伙伴，我们在场有很多，没有你们，我们这么广大的园区的事务没有办法做维持。谢谢你们的付出，在每一天，不管天冷天热、下雨或晴天，我们努力了1年半，我们参观的人数增加了多少？以集美来说，去年全部有89224人次来到集美这个园区参观，比2011年整整增加了30%。今年截至10月份为止，目前已经达到71354人次，比例跟同年去年的10月比增加的5.47%，这是大家一起努力的结果。绿岛以2011年来讲，194000人是到园区参观的人数。去年因为天平台风的天灾的影响，人数在188567人。10月份跟同年当期比， 189774人。这些人占了进绿岛没到园区的比例是多少呢？大概平均一年到绿岛参观人数为大概29万到30万人。我们园区会到绿岛参观、进到园区参观的人数比例大概占了56%、57%，但我们不满意，我们还继续努力。我们希望以后只要到绿岛参观的每一个人都应该到我们的绿岛人权园区去做一个历史的知识的养成跟人权教育的学习。我们未来需要长辈一起努力，我们也需要我们国际所有的人权方面馆长的协助，这是一个重要的串联。我想所有的人权的价值，是我们在全球人权公约里面信守的对我们下一代的承诺，让我们大家一起努力，来让全球大家还给孩子一个非常重要的希望的未来。谢谢大家，谢谢。
Thank you very much. It's a tremendous honor for me to be here with my colleagues and as well as the elders who are present to be part of this presentation that I want to show you some slides from the museum that we will open next year in Canada, September of 2014. But I wanted to start my conversation off to acknowledge the elders. I hope I'm going to say this correctly. Cha'an. Globalization, civic education, and human rights. There may be many of you here this morning wondering why we are building a Canadian Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Well, education is the heart and soul of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. It is the most powerful tool. That is, education is the most powerful tool we have in the ongoing global struggle for human rights. Canadian students and the students from around the world we hope to welcome through our doors or onto our website need to grow up with a strong understanding of the importance of human rights. Young people, they seem to have an innate sense of fairness and compassion for their fellow human beings. And education is the key for turning that natural empathy into lifelong support for human rights. We are building much more than a museum. We are also helping to build global citizens who care for humanity. We're building this museum for our children. We're building it for our grandchildren, to help them understand the value of human rights. Their passion to improve the world is our hope for the future. The Canadian Museum for Human Rights will be a success story, not only because of what we're building, but perhaps how we built it. 4,000 Canadian citizens. That's how many people we listened to. That's how many people gave us their ideas, gave us their time, gave us their comments, their criticisms, their suggestions, and even stories of their own. They've done, as a part of a national public engagement, a civic engagement program, they gave us their sense when we talked to ethnocultural groups, as part of the external academic review of our galleries, as part of our oral history project, and in countless many other ways. The process of public engagement or civic engagement is in itself unprecedented in Canada. And it's what allows us to say that this will truly be a Canadian Museum for Human Rights, because we listened to Canadians about what they wanted to hear in their museum. I'm proud to be here today as a Canadian. Canada has made many contributions that have helped to advance human rights internationally. Yet we also have our own dark chapters in our history related to human rights, and we have an obligation towards the next generations to carefully learn from our past mistakes. This project, in my view, represents our highest and best potential as a nation. It underscores Canada's commitment to human rights. It challenges us to imagine the kind of country we wish to be both today and in the future. The museum gives us exhibits that inspire us and new avenues for inspiring conversation. It embraces all Canadians as equal partners in this new dialogue, and it reflects the best of what Canada has to offer to the world. Yet we are mindful that our most pressing global challenges can't be solved by any one nation. Instead, it takes dialogue, it takes partnership, and it takes the understanding that the rights to which all human beings are entitled transcend both geography and international borders, so that passionate, committed young leaders, students, will always have a place where their energy, their talents, their ideas can be translated into genuine and effective change. As globally aware citizens who have already committed yourselves to the cause of human rights, when we open our doors to the world on September 20th, 2014, it is my hope that you will come to see the Canadian Museum for Human Rights through the lens that I do, as an effective inspiration that allows us to speed up the pace of the most important kind of human progress, the kind that allows people to live in a world that is free of discrimination, oppression, and violence. Now, you in this room have had some amazing experiences that I personally can only humbly learn from each of you. You're already engaged, you're already endowed with a sense of purpose, passion, and principle, on the knowledge that you have it within you to help make this place a better world. It's the job of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights to equip others as you are equipped today. The ability to take action, the ability to understand how to take action. The first step for anyone to be able to take action in the name of human rights is to recognize within themselves your own capacity to make a difference. Every one of us can take a stand for human rights, but awakening that realization is the essential first step. Combining inspiration to take action with the tools to make change is a recipe for real empowerment. Give people the right tools, and they'll do some very remarkable things. That's what we're doing at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. Anyone can be a human rights champion if they have the inspiration and if they have the right tools. So let's do that. Let's create an inspiring encounters with human rights and create more human rights champions. Let's harness the stories of people making genuine change in the world, overcoming tremendous obstacles, demonstrating remarkable acts of resilience, courage, and strength of human spirit. Let's learn from these stories. Let's talk about them. And then let's use them to identify new pathways towards building the kind of world that you in this room know is possible. As a first step, let's build a place that reminds each of us that small acts can lead to large change. We can create the inspiration to make a difference. We know this. And if we can inspire others to take up the cause of human rights, then we can accelerate that pace of change. It's in part owing to leaders, elders, people who have lived it, like people in this room, that we can look out into the world and see clear signs of progress, sometimes remarkable progress. 10 years ago, hardly anyone would have taken you seriously if you had said that a black person would become the president of the United States of America. Not even a decade ago, who would have even conceived of the idea that same-sex marriage could become legal, or something that both homosexual and heterosexual voters would cast a ballot for? So look what's happened in Canada. There's been incredible progress in an incredible short period of time. Barriers standing in the way of universal human rights have been fast falling. In a sense, we're all bearing witness to a remarkable and unprecedented wave of human evolution, but through a different lens. We also see enormous needs of grinding human suffering that only continues to persist. Across North America and certainly in Canada, the barriers encountered by Indigenous peoples are manifold compared with the rest of the Canadian population. Indicators like poverty, rates of illness, disease are dramatically higher, while access to education and even the life expectancy are dramatically lower. And while we've seen progress that has been nothing short of remarkable in the areas of gender rights, the rights of women, the rights of persons with disabilities, I don't think there's anyone in this room here today who would say that our job is yet even close to being finished. For too many people, human rights remain far from guaranteed. We continue to live in a world where there are much suffering, much hurt, needless barriers to full opportunity. And it's here that I want to talk about why our partnership with teachers and schools and students are so important for our museum. The seeds of change may be planted and nourished in rooms like this one, conferences like this one. But taking a stand for human rights doesn't stop when this symposium or this conference that we are all at ends on Sunday. You understand that. You recognize that. It's the same with our museum. Yes, you will be inspired, motivated, and engaged while you're inside our magnificent building, but you're not going to be there all the time, every day of the year. And that is why over the past several years, we've been working to build partnerships with our schools and universities and teachers' organizations and human rights scholars across Canada. Those relationships will set the stage for one of the most important accomplishments from the past number of months, which has been the development of our learning and programming department. We want to see the Canadian Museum for Human Rights have a very real benefit beyond our front doors. In fact, with our educational partners, we're very deliberately trying to eliminate the boundaries between what can be offered inside the walls of our museum and the lessons and conversations you may have in the classroom. Here's a recent example. Last year, we formalized a partnership with the 200,000 members of the Canadian Teachers Federation. Canadian teachers are already at the forefront of human rights education. It's our educational leaders across Canada who are already bringing some age-appropriate learning around bullying, racism, gender, abilities, sexual orientation, and other issues into the classroom. But what happens if teachers in Winnipeg, where the museum is based, have developed an effective classroom resource that expands our children's understanding of human rights issues? Could there be a way that education in Vancouver, Halifax, or even here in Taipei could also have access to those teaching tools? Similarly, if teachers in other cities have put together innovative learning resources that are proving effective, could they bring those to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg? The Canadian Museum for Human Rights and the Canadian Teachers Federation have joined forces to make this happen. Together, we have a commitment to work with educators across Canada to build a nationwide inventory of human rights teaching tools. The result will be an unprecedented national toolkit for teachers, a resource that will open the doors to new ways of teaching about the subject of human rights, and we believe it will mark a new era in the way students learn about human rights. The creation of a Canadian Museum for Human Rights allows us to undertake an initiative that is that important. We also hope to allow educators and students from around the world to have access to these kinds of resources. In fact, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights will always be open to you, both when you visit, but also each time you pick up your smartphone or open your computer. As our director of new media likes to say, technology is a tool that enables dialogue. Social media and the web have become essential tools both for conversation and for action. And the museum's offerings will be available to you no matter where in the world you call home. As a matter of fact, when you get involved from around the world, your contributions from abroad will only enhance the experience we can offer to everyone. With education at the heart of what we do, we have a tremendous opportunity to leverage the contributions that each of us can make as individuals for the benefit of all. The Canadian Museum for Human Rights is a place that both stands as a symbol of human rights, but also lives its values. A human rights museum must have its doors open to all. We must allow our visitors to understand that this is their museum and that they should feel welcome here no matter what they look like, where they are from, or who they are. When you're in need of a moment of inspiration of your own, I ask you to think of this place. And please know that, like my colleagues who are going to be presenting about how important their museums are, not only to their countries but to the world, please think of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in that same way. Share the kind of pride in this project that we at the museum do. And next year, when we open our doors to the world, if at all possible, as I have enjoyed my learning opportunity here in Taipei, Taiwan, please come to Canada. Please consider coming to Canada. I look forward to our paths meeting again soon, and I thank you very much for allowing me to share my presentation about something I'm very passionate of to a group of people who I admire, and I'm humbled to be in your presence. Thank you very much.
Mr. Wang, distinguished Mr. Huang, distinguished guest, I'm using the time till the technical preparations are finished to thank you very much for the invitation to come here. And for me, it's a very touching moment to see sitting you here, because I was asking myself, how many years of prisons are here in this room together now? And now all of us, we are free persons, we can freely discuss, and that's something to be very happy today. And we don't meet us in some place in the city of Taipei. We are coming together here in the prison of the military court in Taipei. And this is something very moving, because if we think back what happened here in this building, that now we are here, we are free, we can open the cells, we can visit every place to the next generation. That's something which makes me very, very happy. Because it's our duty to preserve these places and to tell the next generation what happened in the past. It's not so easy to explain a young student what it means to live in a dictatorship. If I see the young generation sitting in the train and playing with their smartphones, if I'm asking a student yesterday, do you know anything about Jingmei? And they told me, never heard this place. Then I can imagine that it's really a big duty, a big and difficult work to transfer your experience, our experience to the next generation. And I'm very thankful to Mr. Wang and his team that he's trying to solve this problem and to transfer this experience to the next generation. And where can you do it better than here? Where can you demonstrate the younger generation what it means to live in a dictatorship? So
such places as it is here are not less important as far the dictatorship has gone. No, they get more and more important because they are the only place where you can see, where you can feel, where you can smell, even smell what it means to live in a dictatorship. And therefore, it's very, very important to preserve these places and to show it to the publics. I was here, as it had been mentioned already, 2 years ago. And in my memories, okay, now it's working. It's here. Okay. And I had been here 2 years ago, and I remember some impressions I have got 2 years ago. The first one, which I'm mentioning openly also in Germany, is that Taiwan has the best victims' compensation all over the world. I never found another country where victims are compensated in such a way as here. So this is something very impressive, which remained in my mind. But on the other hand, when I spoke with former victims in Taiwan, they complained that nobody of the perpetrators had been punished for what they had done. And this is something which makes the victims very unsatisfied. And I can understand that. And I think it's also important not only to compensate the victims, but to show that justice has won and that the perpetrators are punished for their crimes. The second impression I have still in my mind is that there are a lot of activities to create memorials in Taiwan, and this is something very impressive because in other countries it's different, really different. The society doesn't want to speak about this past. So this is something which is very positive for me. But on the other hand side, when I was here 2 years ago, I was a little bit astonished that only so few visitors I saw here. And I was very glad when I saw your figures there that it improved. And I hope very much that you will continue this way of getting more visitors as in the past. The third impression I have still in my mind was a visit in the National Archive. And I was very impressed about the digitalization of the files of the state administration, so you could make researches on computer screens. But then I asked the director of the National Archive, what about the files of the perpetrators? Do you give access to historians, for example, to the personal file of the guy who is running this prison? And I asked this question 3 times, and I get a very unclear answer. And then at the end they told me, no, we don't give access to the files of the perpetrators. And that is something what should be changed in future in Taiwan as well. The fourth impression I have still in my mind is that there are a lot of activities to remind the past, but there are some white spots in the public memory. And I remember very well a situation where I had been shown the graves of the executed political prisoners. It was on some cemetery, a very lonely place, and these graves were very hidden under the plants. And after this visit, which was really very touching, they showed me the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall. And I was asking myself, there isn't any critical reflection there about his responsibility for these graves, for these events and this oppression in the past. So I think you are on a good way, if I can put it like that, but there are some duties to solve, and I will encourage you to go forward on this way. In Germany, the work I'm doing is very similar to yours, and I want to show you some pictures about the memorial I am running. It is also a former prison, and it was a central prison of the communist secret police. And I will show you some pictures about our work, and probably we can learn from each other. Here it's only a short story of the political background. Probably this is not so important for you, but I want to show you some pictures how it's looking like, and I hope that it's working here. The sound is not going, but you can see some images of the prison, which is still like it was in the past. The cell doors and the basement where the political prisoners had been arrested. A little bit similar to the prison here. And what we try to do is to preserve the prison in a very authentic way. So we don't use the cells as exhibition rooms. There are no photographs inside. There are no artifacts. We leave the prison like it is, and therefore it has a very sad atmosphere. And this is probably the most important thing for our visitors, that they get the impression that the guards just have gone, and they can imagine a little bit how it is to be in such a prison. So this is the first point I want to mention, which is very important, and we spoke already 2 years ago about that. Preserve the authenticity of those places and don't change it into a museum. Preserve it like a prison, and then people better understand what happened in the past. The second thing I want to mention, which is very typical for our work in Berlin and Germany, that we cooperate very closely with the former inmates. And we engaged a lot of former inmates to make guided tours for the visitors. And this is something which is very impressive, especially for the younger generation, that you have the personal contact to somebody who suffered and who tells you his experiences during the dictatorship. And on the other hand side, it's also for the former political prisoners something very important, that they get the opportunity to tell their experiences to the next generation. It makes them really, in a way, happy to have the opportunity to speak about the past and to transfer their own experiences to the next generation. And in a way, it's also a process of healing, because if you don't speak about what you suffered in the past, and then you don't get the chance to heal and to reconstitute your personality as it was before you had been arrested. So our memorial is organized in different departments. You can see it here on the screen. And I will mention only some of our branches. The most important branch is to guide the visitors through the prison. We hid our reception in a former garage, So we didn't change the very important historic rooms, the cells and the interrogation rooms. We changed it only the garages to have some kind of reception and bookshop. And the guided tours are starting there. And as you can see on the photographs, especially former inmates are here to tell what happened in the past. And this is for both sides, for the former political prisoners and for the young generation, a very special moment and a very direct form of transfer of experiences to live, what it means to live in a dictatorship. This way of talking about history was very successful. Nobody thought at the beginning, when we began with our work, that so many visitors would come. We started with 3,000 per year. This year we will have 370,000 approximately, and a lot of them are young people. You can see it on this picture. More than the half of our visitors are students, and therefore we are in a way a very young museum, and that's something what I'm really proud about, because I don't want to speak with people who know already everything about this past. This is boring for both sides. We must achieve the young generation, which are so badly informed because fortunately they didn't experience the dictatorship. We have also prominent visitors as the Chancellor Merkel or the President of Germany, Joachim Gauck, and they come to our place to demonstrate that it's important to commemorate what happened in the past. And this is also something which is part of the process of coming to terms with the past, that the leadership of the country is demonstrating how important it is to know where we come from. Here you can read some visitors' reactions. We have a guest book and we get a lot of letters, and it's always very touching for me to read what especially young people are writing down. They feel very thankful to live in democracy. They feel very thankful that somebody told them what happened in the past, and they really start to think about what happened. And that's something we can really be proud of, because for a young student, democracy is normality. And if we can make him or her to start to reflect that democracy can end every day, and that you have to defend democracy against all attempts to establish new forms of dictatorships, that's something which is really very important to show. As Mr. Wang showed already about your human rights park, we have some kind of eyewitness office where we collect all the memories of the former prisoners. We have a database, we make interviews, and we collect the memories also for the future, because we know that in 20 years it will be very difficult to find eyewitnesses who can tell the story to the next generation. So it's important to collect the memories now, and also to know who was imprisoned. It was a very difficult work to research and to get to know all these names of the former political prisoners. 11,000 names we collected, and it was a long work, and I think it's the same problem to solve here. We have also special archives with the files of the victims, with the files of the perpetrators. In Germany we have access to these files, so we can really say who was running the prison, what has he done before, what is his biography, where he is responsible for, and these archives are in a way, the fundament of our work, and very important. As well, we have a collection with artifacts. We collect artifacts from former political prisoners, but also from the prison itself. So uniforms and hidden letters political prisoners wrote, if they were able to give it to somebody to smuggle it outside. So the collection is the biggest one in Germany about communist prisons in the past, and it's very useful also because we can give these artifacts to other institutions for exhibitions to show to the public. This year we opened a new permanent exhibition. So in the past, the visitors could only make these guided tours through the prison with former political prisoners as guides. And now we opened a new permanent exhibition, which is more for individual visitors, and it's separated from the cells and the interrogation rooms, and there you can get more information about the past, how the prison was organized, how the prisoners were treated, and also what kind of resistance was existing in the prison and as well outside. Here you can see a restored room of the head of the prison on the right-hand side. It was a little already damaged when I came into office in this memorial, but we reconstructed it because we had photographs and we could exactly reconstruct this room where the head of the prison was working. And what we are doing as well to get the attention of the public is organizing events and temporary exhibitions, book presentations, discussions, conferences. So you always have to find new issues, new topics to let them discuss in the public. And this is also a very important part of our work. Also temporary exhibitions which are shown to the public about different topics. Another branch of our work which is really very important is to influence the public debate. I don't know how it's going on in Taiwan, but our memorial is in a way a representative of the victims. So we try to give them a voice in the public debate. If a journalist is making researches about a certain issue, for example, that in the police in Germany there are still a lot of perpetrators of the communist police, and they are making researches, and then they are asking me and our institution, what is your opinion about that? And we can represent and we can say in the public what the victims are thinking. So we are a little bit institution like an interpreter. So we are the connection between the victims and the public debate and also the politicians. So we have also some publications about the history of this prison. But what's very important, and I would like to mention here, are our education services. We don't only organize seminars with students and young people, I think 800 per year, so really such a big, a great number of those seminars, where the young people can deeper discuss what happened in the past. So not only seeing the prison, but to know more about the structures, how the dictatorship worked, And this is also something very important to understand how the dictatorship was working. So we teach them more about the structures and the history. And for this goal, we developed also some kind of moving memorial. We call it Mobile Learning Center. It's a former prisoner transport car which we use as a mobile memorial. So we drive to schools in Germany, and as you can see in the photo on the right hand side, we can fix some kind of informations outside without destroying this car. And you can hear witnesses speaking about their experiences, how had it been to be arrested. And we have also a bigger exhibition which is going together with this mobile learning center, and we can show this and we can leave this in the school for a longer time so that they can inform themselves better, and so they don't have to come to us, we come to them. That's something which is very interesting. And in this context, we developed a new project. We founded a special eyewitness office which offers to schools to invite former political prisoners who are living in the area where the school is situated. So we call the schools up, are you interested to invite some former political prisoner? And he's not living far away from you, because we know where they live now in Germany, and we can connect the two persons, the teacher and the former political prisoner. And this is very well accepted. A lot of former political prisoners had been invited to schools, and this is also a possibility to go into the schools and not to wait that the visitors are coming to us. We have also some projects I want to mention at the end, and especially the international cooperation is something which is very important for me, not only because of the exchange of experiences and the cooperation in practical things, but also because sometimes if you are dealing with the past, you feel quite alone. You feel that the majority of the society isn't really interested, and especially the perpetrators are not at all interested to speak about the past. And sometimes you feel really quite weak and alone. And then it's very important that you know that you are not alone. There are all over the world institutions like we are, and all over the world former political prisoners who are fighting for the truth. And as I said yesterday already on the conference what I attended, I don't like very much communist slogans, but the one I like really very much is solidarity makes us stronger. And this is something why we try to develop this international cooperation, like here on the picture with Tunisia, where the dictatorship ended only 2 years ago, and they are, in a way, they are just starting with the work. You started already several years ago, and we as well. So here at the end, here's some information about our administration. That's probably not so important for you. How many money we are getting from the state, how many money we are getting from our visitors. And we could do more if we had more money. That's always the same, I think. But we try to do the best. And I wish you, Mr. Wang, really my very best for your work here and for your future. You have a responsible job, I think, and I have got the impression when I heard your speech just before that you feel your responsibility to preserve the memories of the victims, and therefore I'm very thankful that you are running this Human Rights Park. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
En primer lugar, saludar al profesor Mac Wang y agradecer su invitación, y al profesor Wang Chi-yun, director del proyecto del museo.
I would like to thank to Professor Map Wang and Professor Chin Yung for presenting the projection.
Es un honor estar esta mañana junto a ustedes. Visitar esta antigua cárcel me ha emocionado.
For me, it's an honor to be here with you today and visit this former jail and share with you the experience.
Me ha hecho recordar las similitudes de las dictaduras y de los sufrimientos de las víctimas cuando no se respetan los derechos humanos ni el Estado de Derecho.
I have recalled the suffering of the victims and what happens when the human rights are not respected.
Mi presentación comienza con esta breve película.
My presentation will start with this brief video.
Jetzt bricht im Übrigen der zweite Turm zusammen.
El edificio que ustedes vieron incendiándose es el Palacio Presidencial de Santiago de Chile.
The building that you saw in the video that was on fire is the Palace La Moneda in Santiago de Chile.
Este hecho representa una de las experiencias más traumáticas de la historia de Chile y más violenta.
This fact represents one of the most violent episodes in the Chilean history.
Esta experiencia dejó muchísimas víctimas, entre las cuales se pueden contar más de 3.000 desaparecidos y ejecutados políticos y más de 40.000 personas víctimas de la tortura.
During the dictatorship, there were more than 1,000 of people dead and more than 40,000 people that were disappeared.
Después de 17 años de dictadura, en un plebiscito convocado para mantener el gobierno de Pinochet, triunfó la oposición con la opción no a la continuidad del régimen.
After 17 years of dictatorship, it was a plebiscite done by the opposition on which Pinochet dictatorship was thrown down.
La experiencia de la dictadura dejó muchísimas víctimas, como dije, de muerte y desaparición, y sobre todo implicó muchísimas movilizaciones de los familiares de las víctimas de quienes estaban en prisión o se encontraban desaparecidos.
The dictatorship means a lot of episodes. One of them were the mobilizations of the families supporting to the experience that had their relatives.
En la lucha por la defensa de los derechos humanos, las mujeres jugaron un papel principal.
At the defense of the human rights, women played a main role, a key role on this defense.
En esta fotografía se ven distintas manifestaciones que corresponden a denuncias en la calle por parte de los familiares de las víctimas.
In these pictures we can see the relatives of the victims that are defending and that are protesting for their conditions.
En la foto donde hay una persona quemándose a lo bonzo, es un padre que está reclamando por 2 hijos que están detenidos.
At the picture we can see a person in flames is one father that has burned himself for the detention of 2 of his sons.
La acción de este padre dio origen a un movimiento que se llamó Movimiento contra la Tortura.
The action of this father began a movement that was called Movement Against the Torture.
Y los manifestantes se reunían en torno a los lugares de tortura para denunciarlos en las distintas ciudades de Chile.
The protesters did rallies around the places where tortures were done to denounce it.
Una vez terminada la dictadura, el primer esfuerzo de los gobiernos democráticos fue establecer la verdad.
Once that the dictatorship was over, the first task of the new democratic government was state the truth.
En la primera fotografía se observa al presidente Elwin recibiendo el primer informe que denunciaba la existencia de 3.200 personas desaparecidas o ejecutadas políticas.
On the first picture, we can see the president receiving the first inform that state the 41,000 victims of the dictatorship.
En el segundo, el presidente Lagos recibe un segundo informe que habla de 40.000 personas víctimas de la tortura.
On the second pictures, we can see President Lagos receiving the second report about the torture that state more than the 41,000.
Estos informes han permitido que Chile conozca la verdad sobre las violaciones a los derechos humanos en Chile.
These reports have allowed that the Chilean society knows the truth about the human rights violations.
Y esta es una verdad pormenorizada, una verdad detallada, con los nombres, apellidos y circunstancias de la detención y muerte de cada una de las personas.
These reports are very precise, they're very accurate, and state the name, the age, and the circumstance of the death of every one of each of those victims.
El segundo desafío que emprendieron los gobiernos democráticos fue iniciar la justicia.
The second task that the democratic government started were justice.
La justicia es quizás lo más difícil y lo más complejo en un proceso de transición como el que se ha vivido en Chile y en otros países de América Latina.
Probably justice is the most difficult and much complex process that has lived the countries in Latin America about stating the human rights.
De hecho, en Chile, durante los primeros 10 años de la transición, Pinochet gozó de una cierta inmunidad e impunidad.
It's certainly to say that after 10 years after the dictatorship was over, Augusto Pinochet enjoyed from certain kind of freedom and not for punishment.
Sin embargo, cuando viajó a Inglaterra, fue detenido en Londres por orden del juez español Baltasar Garzón.
But when he traveled to London, England, he was detained by order by the Spanish judge Baltasar Garzón, and he was detained there.
Esto permitió cambiar radicalmente las condiciones de la justicia en Chile porque obligó a los tribunales a juzgar a Pinochet y a los agentes de la dictadura.
This fact changed radically the circumstances in Chile because it was possible to judge now to the dictatorship inside the country.
Actualmente están abiertos más de 1.400 casos en que se persigue a agentes de la dictadura por cargos de asesinatos y torturas.
Nowadays, there are open more than 1,400 expedients that allow to judge the criminals for assassination and torture.
Hay 250 personas condenadas y 66 cumpliendo penas de prisión perpetua en las cárceles chilenas.
There are 850 persons that are nowadays being judged, and there are 66 persons that are purged long life penalties in prison.
El tercer esfuerzo importante, aparte de la verdad y la justicia, fue la reparación.
After the truth and the justice, the third thing that was important to do was the repair.
La reparación tiene una dimensión material y una dimensión moral o espiritual.
The repair has a dimension, a material dimension, but also has a moral and a spiritual dimension.
En lo material, fundamentalmente se otorgó becas de estudio a los hijos de las víctimas, se otorgó pensiones a las personas de más edad.
And the material dimension, there were given grants for studying to the children and pensions for the elders that suffered for this indirectly.
Entre otras medidas.
And some other things that were repaired.
Y en lo que es la reparación moral, aquí es muy importante el tema de la memoria.
About the moral repair, here this is very important, the memory.
Porque la memoria es lo que nos permite que la experiencia que sufrieron las víctimas no quede en vano.
Because memory is what allows us that what suffered the victims don't stay like that.
De manera que el país emprendió un gran proceso de memorialización, creando memoriales y recuperando sitios de memoria como las cárceles y otros lugares.
So the country started a process of memorialization that began with recovering some spaces for memory, like the jails and some other public spaces.
Un proyecto emblemático en este sentido de memoria y de recuperación simbólica de las víctimas fue la construcción del Museo de la Memoria.
And part of this process of memory, of this collective repair, was the construction of the Memory Museum.
Si la técnica me acompaña, voy a pasar una breve película sobre esto.
And if the technical allows us, we will try to project some videos.
Es lo que nosotros vivimos. Al Museo de la Memoria y los Derechos Humanos.
Okay. El Museo de la Memoria entonces es un proyecto inaugurado el año 2010 por la presidenta Michelle Bachelet para recuperar la memoria de las víctimas y honrarla.
The Museum of Memory and Human Rights is a project that was opening in 2010 by President Michelle Bachelet to recover the memory of the victims.
Tiene un directorio pluralista de 15 personas y cuenta con el financiamiento público del Estado.
It has a pluralistic board with 15 people and has the support of the government.
Su misión se define como dar a conocer las violaciones sistemáticas y masivas a los derechos humanos en el periodo de la dictadura del general Pinochet.
Its mission defines as making known the systematic and tragical human rights violations during the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet.
El museo tiene una importante colección de documentos legales, de fotografías, de películas, de material, objetos carcelarios.
Okay, the museum have a very important collection of movies, pictures, and document archives, and some other personal articles that are preserved.
Se trata de aproximadamente 100.000 documentos en distintos formatos.
There are about 100,000 documents on different formats.
Y que se ponen a disposición del público en estos centros de documentación y de visualización audiovisual que se ven en la fotografía.
And they are open to the general public. They can access it, and you can see in the pictures the audiovisual room, and the places where you can consult this collection.
El museo tiene una exposición permanente que ocupa 2/3 del edificio de 5.000 metros cuadrados.
There is a permanent exhibition that it's possible to visit, and it has it is about 5,000 meters of area.
La colección que se expone en esta exposición permanente es el corazón del museo.
This permanent exhibition is the heart of the museum.
En él está organizado de manera cronológica y temática todo el periodo de la dictadura.
It is organized by chronological way and subjects, all the dictatorship term.
Con una gran cantidad de testimonios y de fotografías y de documentos legales que dan validez a lo que ahí se está planteando.
There's a lot of testimonies and pictures that gave some validity to the testimonies of the victims.
De manera que la memoria de las víctimas queda de alguna manera afirmada por una visión histórica del periodo.
In this way, the memory of the victims can be reaffirmed in a material way.
También en el museo se dedica un espacio importante para exposiciones temporales.
Also, the museum has a place for temporary exhibitions.
En esta fotografía se ven, por ejemplo, la exhibición del artista colombiano Fernando Botero sobre la cárcel de Abu Ghraib en Irak.
In these pictures we can see the temporary exhibition of the Colombian artist Fernando Botero about the jail in Abu Ghraib in Iraq.
Nosotros le damos mucha importancia a la presencia de artistas contemporáneos en el Museo de la Memoria, porque nos permiten llegar con nuestro mensaje a los más jóvenes.
We give a lot of importance to the contemporary artists because we think that this way we are allowed to reach the younger generation.
Y además los artistas nos permiten ir leyendo y reinterpretando esta historia con nuevos lenguajes.
And this way the artists allow us to reread our history and have new knowledge about it.
También realizamos muchas actividades culturales como conciertos, obras de teatro, ballet y muchas otras manifestaciones.
Also, we organized a lot of other activities like concerts, exhibitions, theater, and some other artistic manifestations.
El proyecto educativo del Museo de la Memoria está también en el corazón de sus actividades.
Also, the educational project is in the heart of the activities of our museum.
Como ustedes pueden ver en esta fotografía, nuestras audiencias van desde niños muy menores de 5 años hasta personas adultas.
As you can see in the pictures, our audience goes from very young children to adult people.
En el caso de los niños más pequeños, la visita se realiza de una manera especial, evitando las partes más traumáticas.
In the case of the children, the guiding visit avoids the part that are more traumatic so that it doesn't be so a traumatic experience for them.
Y como se ve en la fotografía de arriba, también participan en museos, en visitas al museo, agentes de la Policía de Investigaciones y de Carabineros de Chile.
Also, to the guide visits to the museum participate the police and the Carabinieri that are one corps of enforcement of the police in Chile.
Como dije, el Museo de la Memoria es un lugar abierto al arte y otorgamos una gran importancia. La prueba de ello está en que dentro de la colección, dentro de la muestra permanente, hay también obras de arte.
The museum is a place that is open to the art. One part of it you can see in all the exhibitions that were done, and some of these are here in these pictures.
Esta es una muestra del trabajo del artista chileno Alfredo Yar, se llama La geometría de la conciencia.
This is an example of of an art piece that is done by the Chilean artist Alfredo Yar, and the name is The Geometry of the Conscious.
En este trabajo él nos dice que cualquiera de nosotros pudo ser una víctima.
Yes, in this work what he tells us is that everybody could be a victim of the dictatorship.
Thank you very much.
感谢 Director Brodsky 的报告，也感谢 Diaz 教授的翻译。再来是交流讨论时间，我们请黄墨老师为我们主持。
非常感谢三位馆长做的非常简洁的，也非常感动人的报告。他们做些什么事情？他们想做什么事情？那他们就跟我讲希望到这里来参观，能跟大家有比较多的对话。那为了争取时间，我们现在就开始看看大家各位前辈，还有这个关心人权的年轻人，有什么问题想提出来问他们的，还是有什么想法想提出来讨论的，这样我们就开始。时间也不很多了，哪一位先有什么想提出来艾琳达女士是我的老朋友，另外还有后面一位。好，艾琳达，你先开始吧。我们有同步翻译，所以你可以选择讲。
OK， 我可能对比起在座的人比较有机会知道像智利的背景，因为我在美国读研究所的时候，就是很多各地南美洲的同学，那我们就必读那个像阿利安德发生的事情，我们都看过那个纪录片，也看过很多了。那就是可以算是美国支持一个大规模的政变就是一个民选政府，可是它是左派的民选政府被美国策动，美国 CIA 策动一个政变，然后政变的时候就非常大规模了，杀人，把人集中到足球场，然后就杀很多人，连美籍的也被杀死。那可是知道说这个独裁政权会到1988年，其实从1973到1988年时间不久。那这个怎么会翻身？就是怎么会说翻身过来，然后甚至把以前的一些那个暴徒甚至一些暴徒还去关，好像这个过程应该是很痛苦的过程。所以我很想知道说这个转型正义怎么会发生？ Okay, so I want to ask more details about the transitional justice in Chile in 1988. How could that come about? It's actually not that long. It's only 15 years after the CIA-sponsored coup in Chile. And it seems very surprising that this turnabout could have come that quickly, and Pinochet even detained in London. So maybe you can tell us more about the political process.
我们2个问题还3个问题在一起回答另外那位。
大家好，我是来自基隆，那我是50几岁，以前小时候到大都没有这方面的那个就是背景知识。那我是暑假的时候参加那个文化部的那个来这边参观，还有一些教育才那个历史的那个阴影才掀开来，我才很震撼的教育才知道。那今天又来参加，我觉得最大的有一些收获，就是说台湾的那个这方面的还是不平衡，就是有加害者，但是没有受害者的资料，这样很不平衡。那我有一个疑点，就是刚才博士他们有讲，就是说蒋介石没有被批判。那更夸张的是，我们基隆国小还有蒋介石的铜像在国小里面。那这个蒋介石的铜像，我们要怎么处理呢？我现在觉得很大的疑惑。那可是知道这些历史以后，我在这些小学走动的时候，我看到蒋介石的铜像，我会觉得很不适当，而且会觉得怎么会这样呢？那我想问问，这些铜像怎么处理呢？那好，这样谢谢。
Good morning. I want to ask Dr. Murray how to put. I know before you create your museum, you already listened to 4,000 citizens' stories, and I would like to ask how to put different prejudice and opinions together and transform into a wholesome concept which can be practiced in a museum.
Bueno, lo primero es decir que, como bien preguntó la señora, la CIA y el gobierno norteamericano estuvo ciertamente detrás del golpe de Estado en Chile.
As well recognized the lady that made the question, the CIA and the American government were involved in the arising of the dictatorship in Chile.
No solo en Chile, sino también en Argentina, en Uruguay, en Paraguay, en Brasil, en Perú, en Bolivia y en todos los países que vivimos dictadura en la década del 70 y del 80 en América Latina.
And we had to say that not only in Chile, as well in Argentina, in Uruguay, in Peru, in Bolivia, in Brazil, and it's a long list of countries.
En relación a lo que ocurrió con la justicia entre el año 73 y 88 hasta el arresto de Pinochet en Londres, pasaron dos cosas.
Yes, about what happened in the process of justice in between 1973 and 1988, it happened two things.
Por una parte, el gobierno de Pinochet dejó una ley de amnistía que permitía que no se juzgaran los crímenes cometidos.
By one hand, in first place, Pinochet dictatorship left a law of amnesty that did not allow to judge the people who committed the crimes.
Esto hizo que la Corte Suprema durante 8 o 9 años no juzgara a los responsables de estos crímenes.
So the Supreme Court for 8 or 9 years did not judge any of those people who committed those crimes.
El arresto de Pinochet en Londres cambió las cosas porque la Corte Suprema empezó a tomar en cuenta el derecho internacional de los derechos humanos.
The arrest in London of Pinochet changed the perception of the Supreme Court and began to consider the international law in judging to the people who committed the violations.
De manera que los crímenes pasaron a ser inamnistiables e imprescriptibles.
So and the crimes passed to be not subject to amnesty and cannot be, could not be prescribed by time.
Entonces se pudo iniciar un proceso de querellas y de justicia que se mantiene hasta el día de hoy.
And so began the process of justice that nowadays is ruling in Chile.
Las personas que han sido condenadas son los principales agentes de los servicios de seguridad de Pinochet.
The persons has been persecuted are the principals, the main chiefs of the security corps in Chile.
En América Latina, los casos más donde se ha avanzado más en materia de justicia son Argentina en primer lugar y Chile en segundo lugar.
In Latin America, the countries that has go forward with more successful with this justice process are Argentina in first place and Chile on second.
Y esto tiene que ver también con una evolución general de la sociedad, donde los derechos humanos pasan a ser cada vez más importantes.
And this has to do as well with the development of the society where the human rights are having more importance than before.
Yes, thank you very much for the question, because it was also my question when I came to Taiwan first time. And after my visit in 2011, I wrote a letter to the president of Taiwan. And I asked him, how is it possible that I has been shown the graves of the executed political prisoners, and then afterwards I see and I visit the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall, and he is presented as a hero. This is a contradiction for me. And if you try to come to terms with the past, the one thing which is really very important is that you're telling the whole truth, and that you don't deny anything and hide it under the table. So you really, if you want to be confidential, then you must tell the truth. But the answer was very polite. As usual in Asia, you're very polite people, but the message was clear: we don't want to change anything. And 2 weeks ago, I met the ambassador of Taiwan in Berlin. She invited me for lunch, and I raised up the question again. And she started to explain me how important Chiang Kai-shek was for Taiwan and for Taiwan's history, and he has done a lot for his country. That was the answer of the ambassador. I don't know the Taiwanese history enough that I can judge this person and his role in the history, but I think it's really a problem to honor a man without telling the truth about his responsibility for the dictatorship in the past. So what is possible? What can you do in such a situation? We know the same problem also from other countries. For example, in Spain, you have a lot of statues of Franco, the dictator there. I don't know how is the situation in Chile now. That would be interesting for me as well. If you have any statue of Mr. Pinochet. In Germany, we have two ways of dealing with that. The most responsible names and personalities are demolished. So the statues are taken away, and also the street names are changed after the peaceful revolution in 1989. But there are other places where we make commentaries just in front of these monuments. For example, there's a big Soviet soldier in Berlin, and it's a memorial or some kind of statue which is commemorating the Red Army who occupied East Germany, and it was built up by the Soviet army after World War II. And now you can, and in front of this statue, you can read some phrases of Stalin, the big communist dictator in the Soviet Union. And I was criticizing this because they restored these phrases of Stalin in golden letters, and they spent a lot of money to restore these phrases of a very brutal dictator, and I criticized that, and but they were afraid to make a conflict with Russia, and therefore they found another solution. There are some information boards now in front of this statue, and people and visitors are informed about the historical role of Stalin and of what happened in the past. So that is another possibility to give commentaries on the historical truth. And I think there will be also changes here. It's a process, and it takes time, and it is necessary to be patient. In Germany, we have street names also about people who played an important role for the establishment of the Nazi dictatorship, like the former president of Germany very long ago, who was nominating Adolf Hitler as chancellor. We had a lot of street names named after him, and only now, after more than 60, 70 years, the younger generation is asking, why do we have this street name here? Is it really necessary? Don't have we other heroes to honorate? Victims, oppositional leaders, people who had been in the resistance against the regimes. Those people we should honor, and not these people who helped to establish the dictatorship. But it took a long time, and I think, or I can only encourage you to raise up this question as often as possible, and someday I hope there will be changes on this field also here in Taiwan.
谢谢，谢谢啊。
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you so much for the question. Let me sort of start off by saying that Canada as a nation is quite a young country. We are much younger than this nation, and certainly as my colleagues on the table. And our museum is very new. We'll open next year. So we, for example, if you looked at issues that coming to this particular museum as we are in today, I would say there is no balance to be brought to this story. This story that we sit in here is wrong. People were harmed, and there is no reason that you can try to bring balance to this story as we sit in this particular prison today. Our role is to look at issues and try to bring balance to some of the issues, and I want to give you some examples because it has been a challenge for us to ensure that we don't put a advocacy position from how Canada views the world. I spoke about this in my comments, same-sex marriage. Yes, it's law in Canada, but it's still very controversial. It's not that everybody agrees with it, it just happens to be the law. And so we have to show the process of how is it that that law became something in Canada. When you look at issues like our First Nations people, Indigenous people in Canada, there was a move by the religious order and governments to take young children away from adults, away from their culture, to take them into schools that basically tried to change their culture. It was called taking the Indian out of the child. They cut their hair, they made them dress differently, they wouldn't allow them to speak their native language, they had to learn to speak English. And so that's a very difficult time for Canada as a nation. One way that we've tried to deal with that story is the fact that Prime Minister Harper, the current Prime Minister of Canada, apologized on behalf of the nation to the First Nations people. And that is a start. It is certainly not an end. It is a beginning to heal a process. And so we want to take balance to talk about why was it that some churches, when organizations decided to take children away from their parents because they felt that they were going to educate them the way that white people might be wanting to educate people as opposed to their natural culture. And today we still see challenges with our First Nations people because, as I said, their level of poverty is greater than the normal in Canada. Their level of life expectancy is less, and we need to continue to address those. So our whole purpose is to try to look at the issues of human rights. We are perhaps the only museum currently in the world. We're not a memorial museum. We're not a genocide museum. There are fantastic museums of conscience that deal with those specific issues. Let me try and give you another example. When you look at our smartphones, our cell phones, there's clearly an indication that there might be child labor that is involved in mining some of the elements that make up a smartphone, a BlackBerry, Samsung, whatever it may be. That's a fact. But we also want to look at the other side of that. Without smartphones, would we have heard of the Arab Spring? Would we have heard of some of the atrocities that take place in the world because people, human beings, civil society is allowed to capture the atrocity and broadcast it to the world? So you have this device that you have to look at it from multiple perspectives and try to understand from a human rights, what is your view? We don't want to take a pedagogical view of the world and say, we're right, you're wrong. Can't be. It has to be, what's the perspective? And our whole purpose is try to create a dialogue, a conversation, because somebody may have a view on same-sex marriage that may be different than mine. We're trying to say to people, please don't rush to judgment about who's right or who's wrong, but try to maybe understand, why do you view the world that way? I see it differently. I'm fascinated. What makes you think the way you do? And so Canada as a nation is starting to become very pluralistic. We are known as a nation that speaks English and French, dualistic. We are much broader than that. And we welcome, and we hope we welcome, the views of immigrants that have made Canada a strong nation. We're very young, but we're very proud because people from Taiwan have come to Canada to make a contribution. And so we take the balance of the challenges and we take the balance of those that have inspired, because our whole purpose of our museum is to bring visitors in and not to make it a Disney experience, because human rights is not. It is a grinding, difficult challenge. But we also want to give people a chance to learn from those who have become human rights champions, somebody that has made somebody's life a bit better. And so that's how we try to bring the balance, to shine a light in a dark corner, but always with the sense of hope and purpose that through hard work and inspiration, we can make a better world.
谢谢加拿大的馆长啊，我们还有时间，我们看看再有3个问题好不好？啊，好，
今天刚刚有问题讲到基隆学校有蒋介石的铜像怎么办？还有讲到中山南路的中正纪念台也有人这样，反正这个是我想在目前这个社会要 做到刚刚那个德国的学者馆长，我看还有我们很大的努力。但是我建议王主任，从我们今天坐在这个地方的地点，还印的中正堂啊，我是不是从这个地方开始做起？这是我的建议，谢谢。
我在我们的国家 Bookstory 里面公开来的 Shared Bible， 然后我这本 Bible 呢，我想在运用者方面呢，应该是从来没有这个样子，冤枉的、被害的，比耶稣在十字架上有名的冤枉者的情形呢更不如。我这本 Bible 呢，如果你们近看的话，或是上面看我这本 Bible 的话，可以看得到，上面用立可白，本来 Bible 是白纸黑字嘛，立可白上面写 Fox your glasses and this Bible， 这是现在的事情。我在我们的国家公开来的、开放的 Bookstory 里面买的 this Bible。然后在这本 Bible 是放在抽屉，而且是国家的工作的者的抽屉的里面被写上去，陌生者写的，不是当面写的。Fox your glasses and this Bible。那对于被 Fox your glasses， 在1996年的快9月的100天内，是我最后一次近视眼镜的运用者当面被借、被偷、被抢、被毁损的 glasses。之后，我到现在是一个不方便用近视眼镜的冤枉者，这是一个见证。
好，谢谢啊！这里是不是还有2位1位对。
我也是政治受难者啊。那么首先呢，感谢我们这个筹备处啊，邀请到这3位很优秀的国外的人权这个专家哈。那么我在这里特别这个强调的是，我们德国来的馆长，他非常直接，而且非常诚恳地指出他看到的我们需要做的，或者将来需要努力的一个方向这个是首先我要表达的。那么当然这个我们人权馆的用心我也非常感激那么第一个问题就是过去60年来，这个德国战后1945年之后他们所做的转型正义，就是在追击纳粹德国的这个余孽方面，他们所做的努力和成果这个世界大家都知道的。那么我要请问他们是怎么做、怎么成功的，或者现在还在努力做些什么？第一个问题。第二个问题，刚才提到我们东方人或者是台湾我们本地人对这个政权或者对过去恩怨的这个厚道或者是我们的这些文化的一个背景。那么我们政府也做了所谓补偿当然不是赔偿，是补偿的一个动作当然这是金钱的方面那也做了维护名誉的这个方面的工作但是我们还有很多事情没有做比如说我们没收的财产惩治判断条例第2条第1项判决的很多政治受难者的财产还没有发还像这些问题我请教德国的我们馆长他认为他的看法是什么？那么最后一个问题就是我们所谓转型正义里面，我们有受害者， 但是我们加害者，他刚才也提到，他问了3次，我们这边说没有所谓的加害者。那么问题是我们现在的执政者是国民党，当年的加害者也是国民党。那么这个问题，请德国的馆长来告诉我们应该要怎么解决。谢谢。
I would say it's not really a transitional justice here in Thailand. Only halfway. Misunderstanding. Morris, right? Dr. Morris saying that we have compensation. Compensation, only 1/3 of the law. The law said should be triple of the compensation. Only halfway. One thing. Mention about street names. Every town in Taiwan, every town, we got Zhongzhen roads or Zhongzhen street. Even here, we have Zhongzhen Hall here. Zhongzhen, Chiangkai 6, another name. So, only halfway transition, not really transition. And one more thing. President Ma is in power. And President Ma is the secretary of Jiang Jingguo. That's Jiang Jingguo is Jiang Kai's son. And he is in power. How can he, give us real transitional justice? No way. So we can also say it's halfway. And one more thing, Dr. Morris mentioned about, a black person, President Obama got in power, right? But the airplane without pilots, remember? We still criticize about that. The airplane without pilots, shooting people everywhere. More innocent people die because of that. So I don't think it's a kind of thing we can celebrate. Thank you. Thank you very much.
还有一位女孩子，对不对？最后一个，对。
你好，我是世新大学新闻系的学生，然后我想请问一下，那个黄默教授就是要设置新的课程，那个受难者时期历史的课程，然后我想问一下这个比较详细的这个课程，然后还有以及这个课程在教学方式与其他课程会有什么不一样吗？
I didn't understand completely the first question with this book. This hall is called, that's your question. Okay, then take this one. And then I'm answering only the third and the fourth question, I think. So the third question was at first, how did we punish the perpetrators in Germany? And it was really a very difficult process, and I'm not satisfied with the results. After the Second World War, at first the Allied forces established a military court in Nuremberg, and the leadership of the Nazi regime was punished. But then the Germans took over the responsibility for this process, and they stopped this process of denazification, as it was called in this time. And only in the 60s it started again. Especially there was a big process against the responsibles for the concentration camp in Auschwitz. And still now we have some processes against former guards in these concentration camps. After the end of the communist regime, the situation was a little bit different, because public prosecutors really wanted to do something, and they started 100,000 cases of investigations against functionaries of the communist dictatorship. But then it came out that there were difficulties of formal difficulties of law, if you want to put it like that. Especially one, if you are living in a state of law, there's one rule which is very important, that you only can be punished for something what is forbidden at the moment when you are doing that. So this is a fundamental rule of the state of law. And of course, if you are a functionary in a dictatorship, it's not forbidden to torture somebody or to arrest somebody. It's legal. And this fundamental rule ends that there isn't any legal possibility to punish the perpetrators. Therefore, we had also discussions in Germany if you really can use this rule, which is developed for state of laws, for democracies, if you can really use this rule, if you try to come to terms with a dictatorship. And my opinion is you cannot use this rule. You have to find some possibilities to punish especially the main responsibles for the political crimes in the past. And that is also the development and the international discussion. We have now international courts in Cambodia, for example, in Den Haag and in other places. And although all these political crimes were in a way legal when they happened, the responsibles are punished, and this is something which is very important also for the future, not only in a way to make some kind of revenge. It is a very important sign for the future that every new dictator knows that one day he will be punished as well. So this is, I think, something which is really very important, that we establish a real functioning justice about political crimes. So at the end in Germany, after the communist regime, 40 persons went to jail. This is not a big number if you know that more than 250,000 people had been arrested because of political reasons, that more than 1,000 had been killed at the borders to West Germany, and more than 50 people had been sentenced to death because of political reasons. Then this number of 40 perpetrators who had been sent to jail is not very high, and especially the members of the secret police, or also the employees of the prison where I'm working now, nobody of them had been sent to jail, and that is something what I'm really regretting very much, and it is also very hard to bear for the victims to see that there's no real justice for them after the end of this communist dictatorship in Germany. So the other point was how do you call this in English? That the property has taken away and it hadn't given back to the victims. We have the same problem in Germany, because in the communist time and also in the Nazi time, a lot of property had been taken by the state. We established the rule that if there's any property taken by the state because of political reasons, we have to give it back to the victims. One example, only 1 week ago, it came out that there's a man who has a big collection of very expensive old paintings. And it came out that these paintings were taken by the Nazi state, and immediately the public prosecutor came and made investigations about the origins of the paintings, and we are obliged to give them back to the victims or the relatives. It's sometimes very difficult to find out where they're living, but we try to do it. There's only one period where the property isn't given back, and I'm criticizing this. the very first beginning of the communist regime in East Germany between 1945 and 1949. This was a period of Soviet occupation, and all the property what has taken away in this period hadn't been given back to the victims, and that is really a problem because, especially in this time, a lot of factories had been taken away, and the process of reprivatization was very difficult because of this decision that the Soviet decisions in Germany are not changed now. So probably if you ask me for my advice what you can do, it is a question of the legal system, and if it's not possible to achieve a change of this legal system here, then probably you can use the international law, because in a lot of cases in Germany, at the beginning of the reconstitution of the property of the former victims started because some lawyers in the United States they went to court, not in Germany but in the United States, to get this property back for their clients, for the former victims, and then the German authorities reacted because they were afraid that the American court sentenced Enterprise, for example, to reconstitute some property to the former victims. So that could be also a possibility that you don't start the process here, but you start it outside, especially if private enterprises are involved in this process. So the third point was the access to the files of the perpetrators. I cannot really give advices to you because I don't know enough about the political situation in Taiwan, but I have to stress that the international development is going to a point to open the administration archives as much as possible. So in the United States you can see in the files of the CIA, for example, after a certain period. You have the Freedom of Information Act that gives you the right to look in the files, in the current files of the administration, and we have a similar law in Germany that you can verify what the administration is doing also nowadays. So it is an international trend to strengthen the rights to have access to the archives and the files of the administration. And if the Taiwanese government refuses to open the archives, then it's probably helpful to cooperate with international institutions to show the Taiwanese government that the free access to the files is also one kind of human rights, the right of information. And if we had a big conference yesterday in the University of Taipei, and we are speaking 4 days about human rights, then it is also necessary to mention that the access to the archives is a human right, not only for historians, but for everybody, and that the Taiwanese government should change something in this field as well. So then the fourth question was about the transitory justice, and about the street names. I know that is really difficult, this change of public commemoration. It's a long process, and you shouldn't stop to be active for this change of public memory. And you're right, you have to start where you can change something. I don't know what about this hall and what about this name, but you can start, for example, in the class, in the school of your own children. You can go to the director of the school and you can talk with him about the problem, that there's a statue of Chiang Kai-shek and your family had been touched, for example, by political oppression. And you can also initiate some changes in the local government, that a street name is changed. I think it's the same situation here as in Germany, that the street names, the responsibility for the street names is in the local government, not in the national government. So in the local government there are different parties and different interests, so you can probably find political support for these changes, but you have to be active, you have to do something. And we in Berlin, for example, we tried it also with some kind of, how can I call it, subversive actions. So we had a very big avenue called after Karl Marx, so the founder of the communist theory. And we went there one night and we renamed the street name by our own. So we changed, we stick something, a new name on the old name, and the next morning we called the press and they made photos and it was a public issue and everybody could see, oh, there's a problem. We have a name, a street name, a very big avenue in the capital of Berlin, which is named after the inventor of the communist dictatorship. So there are some possibilities, and I can only encourage you to go forward on this way. The only thing where I was a little bit astonished, you were speaking about the son of somebody. I don't know if you can really make the family of the dictators responsible for what their parents have done. So I think, yeah? Okay, so I only want to mention, I don't know the issue very well. If we speak about personal responsibility, then it's important that we speak about those persons who really are involved in the crimes and not their families, not their kids, not their grandsons. We have really to concentrate on those people who committed these crimes, and I think there are enough of them, and we have a lot to do if we can throw out these persons out of the administration. I don't know if you know anything about the process in Eastern Europe of the so-called lustration. We tried in Europe to renew the administration, and we verified especially who in the public administration collaborated in the past with the secret police. And in Germany it was a really big process. More than 1.7 million people had been checked if they collaborated with the secret police, and I think approximately 10,000 people have lost their job because of their collaboration with the secret police. So this process of changes in the public administration, of the so-called lustration, so verifying what did the staff in the public administration did in the past, is also a very important step on the way to democracy. But you have to do it in the way and the frame of the state of law. So you cannot do it without hearing the person who had probably collaborated with the secret police or who had been responsible for certain political crimes. You must organize it in a legal process with all rights, also for the perpetrators. If you want to establish a democracy, the democracy is also for the perpetrators, and this is something very important, I think, in these processes, which are discussed all over the world, not only in Taiwan, in South Africa, in the Arab countries, and it's important to stress we want to have a change in the public administration, but we want to organize this change in a legal way with all the rights also for the perpetrators. Thank you.
Thank you. 谢谢。
最后2个问题我把它回答掉。那个针对就是邦辅兄的这个建议的部分呢，因为我们现在所在的这个中正堂是园区历史建筑的一部分。那个名称是从以前就延续到现在，但我愿意努力。我觉得这部分是我们大家努力的第一步。那第2个就是有关课程的部分呢，很重要的是我们未来跟大学的课程有3个重点。第一个是课程的一个课纲教材的通识化的建立，我们希望在整个大学的教育中，要有白色恐怖相关历史方面的一个教材的一个教案，那包括从当代艺术的角度，包括从音乐、视觉艺术还是表演艺术的角度。然后第2个重点是要让受难者的长辈进到大学的课程，去分享生命经验故事的一个传播。因此，北中南东4个区域，我们都必须找出常驻的受难者长辈的一个参与。那最后一点的部分是，这些课纲的一个建立，重要的是让我们所有的大学生、研究生能够不仅除了口述历史之外，能够投入这方面的研究。因此，搭配这个研究的部分呢，明年开始筹备处也会建立奖学金的制度。我们希望透过奖学金的一个方式，能够让所有的研究生，只要有这方面历史方面、社会方面、政治方面、博物馆学方面的研究，我们都应该支持。我想这是3个我们主要努力的方向。谢谢。
Bueno, muy brevemente.
Very briefly.
Quiero decirles que he escuchado con mucha atención las preguntas referidas a Chiang Kai-shek.
I have paid a lot of attention to the questions related to Chiang Kai-shek.
Me declaro bastante ignorante de la historia de Taiwán, por lo tanto no las voy a comentar, pero aprovecho para decirles que he aprendido mucho.
I don't know a lot of the history of Taiwan, so I don't feel able to comment this, but I want to tell you that I have learned a lot about you.
Quiero decirles que hasta hace muy poco tiempo la historia la escribían los triunfadores de los conflictos.
Since a lot of time ago, all the people who triumph on the process were the who write the history.
¿Y qué pasaba con los derrotados? ¿Qué pasaba con los perseguidos? Esa historia no se contaba.
And what happened with people who were defeated, who were persecuted? The history doesn't take in count.
Ahora que estamos viviendo en una sociedad en que valora los derechos humanos, la pregunta principal es justamente esa: ¿qué pasó con los derrotados?
Now that we are living in a society that takes in count the human rights, comes the question: what has happened to people who has been defeated and has been persecuted?
Creo que eso es la pregunta que contesta la memoria, y la memoria es justamente lo que ustedes como víctimas, como asociaciones de víctimas, es lo que está construyendo.
The memory is what answered that question, and you as victims, as association of victims, you should contribute to answering that question.
Thank
you. 谢谢。
Thank you very much. I want to address the comment about President Obama. I was not making a comment about whether he's a good president. I simply was saying, if you look at a history of people where slavery dominated by white Americans, and to think that at some juncture people who were treated not even as human beings, as slaves for decades. To think that somebody from that group of people who weren't even considered to be Americans could find themselves to actually be the leader of that particular country. From that perspective, I say it's an unbelievable perspective. I am not making a political comment, trust me, I'm not making a political comment. And I think it's one of the things that we have struggled with in our museum. And I just would give you a quick example, if I could, please. When you're building a new museum in a country like Canada that has many, many immigrants that have made our nation, have been very proud producers of making Canada a great nation. Sometimes people will look at a physical building and they will, what I call, bring a tape measure, a ruler, to say how much space do we have? How much space do we have? Because we want to make sure that we have as much space as maybe our other communities. And I'll give you a specific example. One of the areas that we are looking at, because our museum, I was trying to say at the beginning, is all about education. We want to educate people about human rights. And so one of the elements that we talk about with respect to education is one of the most known genocides in the world is the Holocaust. But it's not about the Jews. It's about the study of the Holocaust. And so we have people will say to us, so how are you going to deal with the Palestinians? And my response to them is, we're not a political museum. If there's an issue around human rights, then we will talk about that issue. But we are not here to become a political museum, and it's why I would not make a statement about whether I think President Obama is a good president. It is incredible. It would be like in Canada to have somebody who's a member of the First Nations. At some point, perhaps when a member of the First Nations of Canada has become the Prime Minister of Canada, maybe people will look and say, Canada has matured as a country, because it will allow those people that are treated in different positions, very difficult positions, to now be treated as a human right and have the same rights as everybody else without discrimination. And for us in our museum, it is one of our biggest challenges, is to bring a sense of balance, is to bring a sense of understanding of the process of what allowed people to make the decisions that they made. When we talk about genocide, we bring in Raphael Lemkin, who is a Polish Jew, who looked at many genocides across the world and realized that the perpetrators always used the same system with the same result. Our museum wants to talk about what is that process. And I hope through the education of that, we can allow people to understand when they see some of these processes that they don't say, well, it's nothing, we won't take action, don't worry about it. No, you stop, you do something, you learn. And I'll make one final comment on transitional justice. And I say this with very humble comments, because I sit and I'm looking at a group of women and men who have been treated in a way that I can't even imagine. I can't even begin to imagine. But it's my hope that we can create a museum that gives a younger generation, through understanding of oral history, the tragedy that human beings have suffered, that perhaps we can, through a transition, work towards a better world. It does not happen overnight. And not one country or one person can make that difference. But through symposium like this, through learning, as I am learning today, may be the opportunity for us to make the world a little bit better exist if we all try to understand what human rights fundamentally mean to the person sitting beside you, behind you, and around you. Through education, the power of education, of understanding, that has to be the way that we strive to make the world a better place. Thank you.
非常感谢3位人权博物馆的馆长 同时也很感谢各位贵宾、各位前辈提出这些问题所以我们有限于时间我们有这样的一个十分深入的一个对话这当然只是一个开始，我们希望以后有机会再进一步的深刻的对话，从深刻的对话，我们既能互相了解，也可能给这个博物馆带来的方向，就是说我们应该往哪里去。谢谢大家，谢谢大家。
请筹备处的同仁帮忙引导大家，因为大家想要跟4位馆长做个合照。